What if everything you thought you knew about a prince's life was a carefully constructed illusion? Imagine the cameras flashing, the smiles perfectly timed, the photographs of a glowing father cradling his newborn son. The world swooned. Prince Harry, the rebellious royal who had once been branded the spare, was suddenly reborn as a doting father. His happiness seemed untouchable, his role unshakable. But what happens when the very thing that defined him as a man, a husband, and a father is ripped away in a single test result? Tonight, we step into a story so devastating that it shook not just a family, but the very foundation of monarchy itself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the first moment Harry introduced Archie to the world, something felt different. He wasn't just showing off a baby. He was proving something to the world, perhaps even to himself. Do you remember that iconic photo? Harry beaming from ear to ear, eyes shining with the kind of pride you can't fake? That image traveled across continents, a fairy tale reborn for the modern age. But here's the contradiction. Fairy tales don't survive DNA testing. And behind that smile, insiders now say, there was already unease. Why? Because the story of Archie's birth had always carried whispers. Whispers so persistent that even the palace staff couldn't ignore them. Ask yourself, why were the details of Archie's birth wrapped in secrecy unlike any other royal baby before him? Why was Meghan taken to a private hospital instead of the traditional royal ward? Why was the announcement delayed, confused, then scrambled at the last minute? These may have seemed like harmless quirks, a couple asserting their independence. But as history shows, royal secrecy often hides something far darker. And Harry, caught in the middle, may have been protecting a truth he himself didn't fully understand. Let's rewind for a moment. Harry wasn't just any royal child. He was Diana's son, the boy who walked behind her coffin, the young man who grew up under relentless media scrutiny. His life was shaped by betrayal, by watching the marriage of his parents collapse in full public view. He vowed he would never allow history to repeat itself. He believed, perhaps more than anyone, in protecting his own children from pain. Yet, what happens when the ghost of betrayal doesn't come from the outside world, but from within your own home? That is where Harry's story begins to unravel. Now picture this. Harry, alone in his study, the weight of a sealed envelope in his hands. That envelope contained the DNA test results that would confirm or destroy everything he believed about his family. Just the thought of opening it, the paper shaking between his fingers, paints a picture of raw human vulnerability. Isn't it strange how in that moment, a man who had stood against armies of photographers, who had walked into war zones, who had confronted danger head-on, was undone by a single slip of paper? And if you think that image is haunting, wait until you hear what those results revealed. But before we open that envelope, let's ask the uncomfortable question. Why now? Why does this matter today? Because the monarchy is not just a family. It is an institution built on lineage, bloodlines, and heritage. Remove the certainty of paternity, and you don't just break a man, you threaten a dynasty. This isn't just Harry's private heartbreak. This is a crisis that ripples outward, touching titles, succession rights, and the fragile trust between the public and the crown. And make no mistake, once the truth comes out, it can't be stuffed back behind the gilded palace gates. The world has seen scandals rock the House of Windsor before. Edward VIII abdicated for love. Charles admitted infidelity. Andrew faced disgrace. But this is something far more explosive. For the first time in modern history, a prince is facing the possibility that the child he raised, the son the world believes is royal, may not be his by blood. Can you even imagine the psychological wreckage of that realization? Would you walk away? Would you cling to love in spite of betrayal? Or would you, like Harry, decide to cut every tie once and for all? The emotional stakes are staggering. We're not talking about rumors anymore. We're talking about hard science. DNA doesn't lie. And yet, in this case, the truth is crueler than fiction. One insider described Harry's reaction as a man shattered into pieces. Another said he sat in silence for hours, staring at nothing, whispering just 4 words again and again. It can't be true. Think about that. A prince, a husband, a father, brought to his knees by a single truth. And yet, this wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning of a war he never expected to fight. Because here's where it gets darker. If Harry wasn't the father, then who was? That question alone has the power to ignite a firestorm. And insiders claim that when suspicions began to circle around Meghan's past connections, old names resurfaced, names the palace had hoped would never again be spoken aloud. The search for truth wasn't just about Archie. It became a witch hunt, a dangerous unraveling of Meghan's past, and a public spectacle that turned every smile she'd ever given into potential evidence of deception. But don't think for a second that Meghan was silent. While Harry reeled from the results, Meghan was reportedly calculating her next move. Silence can be deafening, and hers spoke volumes. Did she know? Did she hide the truth? Or was she as blindsided as Harry claimed to be? Those questions remain unanswered, and the lack of clarity only fueled the storm. The public began to take sides, the media sharpened its knives, and the monarchy scrambled to contain a disaster that could destroy centuries of tradition. And that brings us back to the moment you've been waiting for, the envelope. Harry's trembling hands. The cruel words printed in cold black ink. Not the father. 3 words that obliterated his trust, his marriage, his identity as a father. 3 words that would set him on a path of no return. He had been betrayed, not by the tabloids this time, not by the press, but by the woman he had left everything behind to protect. The irony is breathtaking. The prince who fled to save his family from scrutiny found himself broken by a truth too devastating to hide. But here's the real kicker. Those results didn't just destroy Harry's private life. They triggered a domino effect across the entire royal family. Because if Archie isn't Harry's son, what does that mean for the monarchy's future? What does that mean for succession, for titles, for legitimacy itself? This isn't just a family scandal. It's an institutional earthquake. And that's why the palace, for all its history of silence, could no longer stay quiet. The story matters because it's more than a headline. It's a mirror. It asks each of us, what would you do if the truth tore your life apart? Would you cling to the illusion to protect your family? Or would you walk away, knowing the price is exile, disgrace, and loneliness? Harry made his choice. He cut all ties. And that choice, shocking as it is only the first chapter in this unraveling saga. Because here's the truth you need to remember. When bloodlines are questioned, dynasties fall. And what came next would change everything. Not just for Harry and Meghan, not just for Archie, but for the crown itself. No one saw it coming. What does a father look like when his entire identity is built on a lie? That's the chilling question that hovers over Prince Harry's carefully crafted image. The soldier turned family man. The rebel prince who finally found redemption in fatherhood. For years, Harry held Archie in front of cameras as living proof that he had broken free of the cycle of pain that destroyed his mother and haunted his youth. But how much of that image was real, and how much of it was the desperate performance of a man clinging to the one thing he believed gave his life meaning? Tonight, we peel back the glossy photographs and media smiles to uncover the cracks that insiders say were there from the very beginning. Let's not forget, Harry's transformation into the perfect father was one of the biggest rebrands in royal history. Before Archie's birth, Harry was the prince who partied in Las Vegas, who dressed in offensive costumes, who carried the weight of scandal after scandal. But when he stood beside Meghan and cradled his newborn son, the narrative shifted overnight. Suddenly, the spare wasn't a burden. He was a hero. The press gushed about his glowing smile, his tender gaze, his newfound maturity. Do you remember those headlines? Harry, the proud papa. From rebel to role model. They made him untouchable, didn't they? But now ask yourself, was that image a genuine reflection of who Harry had become, or was it a mask hiding something much darker? Think about the way he spoke in interviews after Archie's birth. The emotion in his voice, the tears in his eyes. This little thing is absolutely to die for, he said. I'm just over the moon. On the surface, those are the words of a new father overwhelmed by love. But here's the contradiction. Behind the scenes, palace staff recall tension. They say Harry was uncharacteristically protective, refusing to let anyone close to Archie, even longtime royal aides. He wouldn't allow the usual photographs, the traditional hospital steps reveal. Why? Was it fatherly instinct, or was it fear? And if it was fear, what exactly was he afraid of? The secrecy surrounding Archie's birth wasn't just unusual, It was unprecedented. William and Kate followed the script with precision. Lindo Wing, smiling photos, the iconic red dress that mirrored Diana's. But Harry and Meghan broke every rule. Meghan gave birth at Portland Hospital, miles away from royal tradition. The palace delayed the announcement. Photographers were told to stay away. Even the official statement confused timelines, leaving reporters scrambling. If this was simply about privacy, why the misdirection? Why the cover-up? Insiders suggest that Harry himself was the driving force behind the secrecy, desperate to control the narrative. Did he already sense that something about this story didn't add up? Let's dig deeper into that question. From the moment Archie was introduced, eagle-eyed viewers noticed inconsistencies. The baby looked older than expected for his reported age. Meghan's post-birth appearance raised eyebrows. Some said she seemed far too slim, far too composed for someone who had just delivered. Were these harmless observations or early warning signs of a deeper deception? And why, even as speculation swirled, did Harry insist, almost aggressively, that everything was normal? He smiled bigger. He spoke louder. He clutched Archie tighter. Was he trying to silence the doubts of the world, or his own? Imagine what it must have felt like for Harry, a man haunted by betrayal, desperate to prove to the world, and to himself, that he had finally built a family worth fighting for. The irony is almost unbearable. By presenting himself as the perfect father, he placed himself on a pedestal so high that when the truth emerged, the fall would be catastrophic. Isn't it always the case? The louder someone insists they've found happiness, the more fragile that happiness tends to be. And here's where the story takes an even more haunting turn. Behind the palace gates, whispers began. At first, they were nothing more than harmless gossip among staff. Questions about timelines, about details that didn't add up. But those whispers grew louder. And the cruelest part? They reached Harry's ears. Imagine being a new father, believing you've finally escaped the shadow of your past, only to hear the people around you questioning whether your child is truly yours. How would you react? Would you lash out in anger? Would you bury your head in the sand? Harry, insiders say, did both. He defended Archie fiercely in public, yet behind closed doors, those whispers gnawed at him like a slow poison. Do you remember that moment when Harry spoke of Archie inheriting his red hair? It was a tender comment, a father's pride in seeing himself reflected in his child. But think about the deeper implication. Was Harry convincing the world, or was he convincing himself? Did he cling to that detail as proof that the child in his arms was truly his own? And when the DNA test results shattered that illusion, what did it do to his soul? This is the contradiction that makes Harry's story so compelling. To the public, he was the epitome of a father's love. To those inside the palace, he was a man fighting invisible battles, silencing doubts that refused to stay buried. And the more he performed the role of perfect dad, the more those around him questioned what he was hiding. Isn't that the cruelest irony? The man who wanted nothing more than to be seen as a good father may have been performing for an audience he could never satisfy. So let me ask you directly, if you were in Harry's shoes, what would you do? Would you continue smiling for the cameras, holding tight to the illusion that your child is truly yours? Or would you demand the truth, no matter how devastating it might be? Harry chose the latter, and that choice would lead him to the envelope, to the results, and to the unraveling of his entire identity. But before he reached that breaking point, the whispers grew louder, the contradictions sharper, and the image of the perfect father began to crack. Because here's the thing about secrets, they don't stay hidden forever. And the harder you try to bury them, the more violently they explode when they finally come to light. Harry's secret, the one he fought so hard to suppress, was about to burst into the open. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were questions shouted in headlines, murmured in interviews, dissected on television screens around the world. And Harry, standing there with Archie in his arms, knew he couldn't outrun the truth much longer. The perfect father image was collapsing. The fairy tale was unraveling. And Harry's world was about to be shattered in a way no one could have imagined. But what happens when whispers turn into undeniable proof? What happens when suspicion transforms into cold, scientific fact? That's the story we're about to uncover. What if the whispers you tried so hard to silence refused to die down? What if, no matter how many smiles you forced for the cameras, no matter how many statements you released, those whispers grew louder, sharper, and harder to ignore. That's the storm Prince Harry found himself in. He had spent months clinging to the image of the perfect father, but the walls of secrecy he and Meghan had built around Archie's birth only fueled suspicion. And once doubt takes root in the royal family, it spreads like wildfire. The origins of those doubts weren't born in one moment. They were a series of small cracks that, piece by piece, eroded the illusion. Let's start with the most obvious, Meghan's pregnancy itself. Do you remember the strange timeline of her public appearances? One week, she looked heavily pregnant. The next, she appeared slim and glowing, walking with ease in heels most women would avoid at such a late stage. Was it simply camera angles, clever styling, or something else? Critics and commentators picked apart every frame, every gesture, every detail. And Harry, fiercely protective, lashed out at the media, accusing them of cruelty and intrusion. But here's the contradiction. Did his anger come from righteous indignation, or from fear that the world was seeing something he couldn't admit? Palace insiders noticed inconsistencies too. Longtime aides spoke of sudden secrecy around Meghan's medical arrangements. Unlike Kate, whose births were carefully documented with doctors and official statements, Meghan's process was veiled in mystery. Even senior royals weren't informed of exact details. Why the cloak and dagger approach? Was it privacy? Or was it protection from a truth too explosive to reveal? And then came the birth announcement fiasco. Remember that day? The palace initially released one version of events, then scrambled to correct it. First they said Meghan was in labor, then hours later they announced she had already given birth. Reporters were left baffled, timelines didn't add up, and suspicion deepened. How could the most media-savvy couple in the world botch something so important? Unless, of course, the confusion wasn't a mistake at all, but a cover. Ask yourself, what were they trying to hide? It didn't stop there. The christening of Archie added fuel to the fire. Royal tradition dictates that christenings are public events, with carefully orchestrated photographs and access to confirm the child's place in the royal lineage. But Harry and Meghan chose secrecy once again. No open press, no clear view of the baby, just carefully curated images controlled entirely by them. It was a bold move, but also a risky one. Because in the absence of transparency, rumors thrive. And the rumors were brutal. Questions about surrogacy, about lineage, about whether Archie was even born of Meghan at all. The public may have been divided, but inside the palace, those whispers echoed in corridors that had heard centuries of scandal. And here's the most devastating part. Those whispers weren't just about Meghan. They were about Harry himself. Staff members reportedly questioned his obsession with shielding Archie, his refusal to follow even basic royal protocol. Some began to wonder, did Harry know something the rest of them didn't? Or worse, was he in denial, protecting a truth he couldn't bear to face? Let's pause here and ask the most human question of all. If you were Harry, would you want to know the truth? Or would you cling to the illusion, even if it was built on shaky ground? Think about the courage or the desperation it takes to seek out a DNA test. That choice doesn't come lightly. It comes from nights spent awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the whispers are right. It comes from the sting of doubt when you look into your child's eyes and wonder if you see yourself there, or someone else. That's the heartbreak that haunted Harry long before he ever held that sealed envelope in his hands. But the whispers didn't just stay behind palace gates. They seeped into the tabloids, into late-night conversations, into the relentless churn of social media. Headlines screamed about phantom pregnancies. Photos were dissected with ruthless precision. The world turned into an amateur detective agency, with every stranger online convinced they held the key to the truth about Archie's parentage. And through it all, Harry fought back. Angry statements, lawsuits, scathing words against the press. Yet, paradoxically, the more he fought, the more people wondered, what was he so desperate to hide? This contradiction is at the heart of the story. Harry, the man who claimed he wanted nothing but privacy, became a lightning rod for speculation because of the very secrecy he demanded. He wanted to shield his son, but by doing so, he exposed him to the harshest kind of scrutiny. Isn't that the cruelest irony? The more he tried to protect Archie, the more he endangered him. And the whispers that began as harmless gossip evolved into a question that could no longer be ignored. Who is Archie Harrison's real father? Inside the palace, tension mounted. Advisors worried about the optics. Senior royals grew frustrated with Harry's refusal to follow tradition. And behind closed doors, sources say, there were arguments, heated, painful, unrelenting. William reportedly confronted Harry, demanding clarity. Charles. He pushed back harder, angrier, more defensive than ever. But here's the twist. Defensiveness often masks fear. And fear, in this case, pointed to one devastating possibility. That Harry himself suspected the whispers were true. Now, here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. Because suspicion, once planted, doesn't just stay in your head, it drives action. And Harry, desperate to prove himself right or wrong, took the step no royal had ever taken before. He demanded proof. Cold, scientific proof. A DNA test. Imagine that moment. The sheer weight of the decision. Knowing that the answer could either silence the whispers forever or destroy everything he loved. Would you have the courage to ask for such a test? Or would you live in denial, preferring a lie over a devastating truth? Harry chose the truth. And that choice would set in motion a chain of events that would unravel not just his family, but the monarchy itself. But before we get to that envelope, before we uncover the truth that shattered Harry's world, we have to understand just how deep those suspicions went. Because the origins of doubt weren't just rooted in secrecy, they were rooted in betrayal. Betrayal of tradition. Betrayal of trust. Betrayal of the fairy tale the world had been sold. And once betrayal takes root, it never lets go. So the question remains, was Harry's obsession with protecting Archie the act of a loving father, or the desperate shield of a man who already knew the truth? As the whispers grew into roars, as the contradictions piled higher, Harry's world became a pressure cooker ready to explode. And when it finally did, the results would send shockwaves across the globe. What does it feel like to stare at an envelope that could destroy your entire life? Imagine the weight of it in your hands. Small, harmless, just a thin piece of paper inside. And yet, for Prince Harry, it wasn't just paper. It was a ticking time bomb. The moment he decided to demand a DNA test, his world was already changed. Because once you ask for the truth, you can't unhear it. You can't unknow it. And for Harry, that truth was waiting, sealed in silence, daring him to open it. But how did we even get here? How does a prince, someone raised under centuries of tradition, surrounded by advisors, cocooned by protocol, end up sneaking DNA tests like a desperate man searching for answers? That's the contradiction that makes this chapter so devastating. On one side, you have the fairy tale image of the devoted father. On the other, a man quietly unraveling, unable to silence the whispers gnawing at him day and night. Insiders claim the process was cloaked in absolute secrecy. Harry couldn't risk palace staff knowing. He couldn't risk the media catching wind. So how do you test the paternity of a royal child without setting the world on fire? Very carefully. Some say he confided in one of his oldest friends. Someone outside the palace circle, someone he trusted with his life. Others claim Meghan knew nothing, that Harry acted alone, terrified that if she discovered his suspicions, the marriage would implode before the results even came back. Picture this, Harry driving late at night, disguised, slipping into a private clinic. No royal cars, no flashing lights, just a man desperate for certainty. Can you see it? The prince stripped of his titles, his status, his glamour, reduced to a father begging science to tell him whether or not his child was truly his. It's raw. It's humiliating. It's human. And it's exactly the kind of moment the monarchy never wanted the world to see. Now here's where it gets chilling. Sources say the test wasn't just done once. It was done twice. 2 separate samples. 2 separate labs. Why? Because Harry was clinging to hope. He couldn't bear the thought of a single mistake, a false result. He needed certainty. Imagine that desperation. The kind of fear that makes you double-check reality itself. And each test came back the same. Each result echoed the same devastating words. Not the father. But let's not open the envelope just yet. Let's sit with the tension, the build-up, the weight pressing down on Harry's chest. Because this wasn't just about paternity, it was about betrayal. Betrayal by the woman he gave everything up for. Betrayal by the story he had told the world. Betrayal by his own need to believe in the fairy tale. And isn't that the cruelest irony? The very man who ran away from the palace to protect his family was now discovering that the family he fought for may never have been his at all. Let's pause and ask the question no one dares say out loud. Did Meghan know? Was she hiding the truth from the start? Or was she blindsided, just like Harry? Silence is dangerous, and Meghan's silence in these crucial moments only fueled speculation. Some claim she suspected what Harry was doing, but chose not to confront him. Others whisper that she begged him not to go through with the test, terrified of what it would reveal. And Harry, stubborn as ever, pressed forward anyway. Because once doubt takes hold, love alone isn't enough to silence it. Think about the emotional roller coaster he must have been riding. Hope one moment, despair the next. One part of him begging for the test to confirm what he desperately wanted, that Archie was his. Another part bracing for the truth he already feared. Have you ever been in that position? Hoping and dreading the same answer at once. It's a torment unlike any other. And then, the results arrived. Delivered in a plain envelope. No royal seal. No ceremony. Just cold science wrapped in ordinary paper. Imagine Harry holding it, heart pounding, knowing that inside lay the verdict that could either save his marriage or end it. He didn't open it right away. How could he? Once the truth is revealed, there's no going back. Every laugh, every smile, every tender moment with Archie would be reinterpreted through the lens of that result. He would never look at his son the same way again. So he waited. Hours, maybe days, sitting in silence, the envelope unopened, a ghost haunting him from his desk. Until one night, he couldn't take it anymore. Alone in his study, the world asleep, he slid a finger under the seal. The paper tore with a sound that must have echoed like a gunshot in his ears. He unfolded the letter. His eyes scanned the words. And there it was, the confirmation of his worst fear. Archie was not his biological son. Let's stop here and really feel that moment. Can you imagine it? The prince who had sworn to protect his family, who had rebranded himself as a father above all else, reduced to a broken man whispering, "It can't be true." Reports say he sat for hours, frozen, staring at the page. Some say he wept. Others say he raged, slamming his fists against the desk, the walls, anything to drown out the silence. But however he reacted outwardly, inwardly he was destroyed. Because the test hadn't just told him he wasn't a father. It told him he had been living a lie. And here's where the contradictions pile up. For years, Harry had defended Meghan against every accusation, every rumor, every tabloid headline. He fought lawsuits. He attacked journalists. He painted himself as her protector. But in that moment, wasn't he forced to wonder, was he protecting her, or was he protecting a lie? Was the woman he trusted with his life the very person who had betrayed him in the cruelest way possible? The test didn't answer those questions. It only raised more. If Harry wasn't the father, then who was? That's the question that would haunt him in the days that followed. The whispers returned, louder than ever. Old names resurfaced. Alleged flings. Past relationships Meghan had hoped were forgotten. Every man linked to her became a suspect in the cruelest guessing game imaginable. And Harry, already shattered, had to endure the humiliation of wondering whether someone else, not him, was the true father of the boy he had loved as his own. So let me ask you, what would you do in his place? Would you cling to the child, insisting that biology doesn't define fatherhood? Or would you see every moment, every smile, as a reminder of betrayal? Harry's answer would come soon enough. But for now, he was left alone, broken, staring at a truth that no prince had ever been forced to confront. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, remember this. Harry wasn't just a man. He was a royal. And secrets of this magnitude don't stay hidden for long. Because if Harry knew, then someone else would know. And once the palace got wind of the truth, the fallout would be catastrophic. Not just for Harry and Meghan, but for the entire monarchy. But how did the palace react when whispers of the DNA test reached them? How did Charles, William, and the rest of the family respond when the truth threatened to expose their dynasty's greatest vulnerability? That's where the story turns from private heartbreak into public scandal. And what came next would change everything, forever. What happens when silence speaks louder than words? When the person you look to for answers refuses to give them? For Prince Harry, the devastating DNA results had already shredded his sense of self. But the real torment came next, not in the science, not in the envelope, but in the reaction, or lack thereof, from the woman at the center of it all, Meghan Markle. Imagine the scene. Harry sits across from Meghan, the letter trembling in his hands. his voice low, broken, demanding answers. And Meghan? According to those close to the couple, she didn't scream. She didn't deny. She didn't confess. She said nothing. Just silence. And in that silence, Harry's world cracked even further. Because sometimes, words can be twisted, argued over, explained away. But silence. Silence leaves room for every nightmare to grow. Why didn't she answer? Was she guilty? Shocked? Or simply unwilling to play into Harry's accusations? That's the contradiction. Meghan, who had always been vocal, always ready with a sharp rebuttal against her critics, chose silence at the very moment her marriage needed clarity. And that silence, insiders say, was more devastating to Harry than any confession could have been. But let's rewind. In the days leading up to that confrontation, Harry had isolated himself. Friends said he was like a ghost, pacing the halls of their Montecito home, speaking in fragments, clutching the results like a cursed object. Meghan noticed his distance, of course. She asked questions, tried to draw him out. But Harry couldn't bring himself to reveal the truth until the dam broke. And when it did, Meghan's lack of reaction became its own kind of answer. Picture it. Meghan sitting calmly, her face unreadable, while Harry's rage bubbled over. He accused, demanded, begged. And still, silence. Some insiders claim she whispered, "This is madness," under her breath. Others insist she simply looked away, refusing to engage. Whatever the truth, Harry took it as confirmation. If she had nothing to hide, why not speak? Why not fight back? And here's the cruel irony. Meghan's silence may not have been guilt. It may have been calculation. Meghan, the actress turned duchess, knew that every word spoken in anger could one day be twisted, leaked, or weaponized. Perhaps she chose silence not out of guilt, but out of survival. After all, how do you argue with DNA? How do you defend yourself against science? But Harry didn't see it that way. To him, her silence screamed louder than any denial. It was betrayal in its purest form. The woman he had given up his country for, the woman he had stood against his family for, wouldn't even look him in the eye and say, "It isn't true." And in that absence of words, Harry's love turned to suspicion. His suspicion turned to fury. And his fury turned to something far more dangerous, certainty. Now let's pause and ask you, the viewer, the rawest question of all. If your partner sat in silence after you confronted them with proof of betrayal, what would you think? Would you believe their silence meant innocence or guilt? Would you cling to hope, or would you hear only confirmation of your worst fear? Harry made his choice. He heard guilt, and that choice would set him down a path from which there was no return. The arguments grew darker in the days that followed. Staff reported shouting matches echoing through the Montecito estate, doors slamming, long hours of Harry alone, Meghan retreating into quiet seclusion. The children shielded from the storm, unaware that their parents' marriage was hanging by a thread. And still, Meghan refused to answer. She played the role of calm, some say cold, while Harry spiraled into rage. But here's the shocking twist. Meghan's silence didn't just devastate Harry, it infuriated the palace. Yes, the palace. Because by this time, word of the DNA results had begun to seep into the royal circle. Advisors knew. Charles knew. William knew. And when they asked Harry directly, he could give them no clarity. Meghan hadn't spoken. She hadn't denied. And so, to the palace, her silence was as damning as the results themselves. That left the monarchy in crisis. If Meghan wouldn't confirm or deny, then the rumor mill had free rein. And nothing destroys a royal family faster than unanswered questions. Think back to Diana's infamous interview. Her words, her confessions, burned into history. Meghan knew the power of words. And perhaps that's why she chose silence. She wasn't going to give the palace a soundbite, a quote, a headline to weaponize. But in protecting herself, she allowed the storm to grow. For Harry, the silence was unbearable. At night, he sat in Archie's room, watching him sleep, looking for himself in the child's features, searching for something, anything, that proved the test was wrong. But the more he looked, the more the silence echoed in his head. And the more it echoed, the less he could deny the truth. Archie wasn't his. Meghan wouldn't say otherwise. And the marriage he thought was built on love now felt like it had been built on lies. Here's the tragic contradiction. Harry loved Archie. No matter what the tests said, he had been the one to hold him, to comfort him, to call himself Daddy. But how do you reconcile love with betrayal? How do you hug a child knowing that every hug is a reminder of the lie that brought him into your life? This is the torment that consumed Harry. Love on one side, betrayal on the other, and silence stretching endlessly between them. Friends say Harry grew reckless. He drank more. He isolated himself. His once fiery speeches turned subdued. Meghan, meanwhile, appeared in public composed, unshaken, projecting calm. The contrast was striking. The perfect image of Meghan beside the unraveling figure of Harry. And the world noticed. Headlines speculated about marital strife. Paparazzi lenses captured the distance between them. And still, no answers. So let me ask you again. What would you do if silence was the only response you ever got? Would you wait it out, hoping for words that never came? Or would you take that silence as proof that everything you believed was a lie? Harry took it as proof. And in doing so, he began to sever the ties that had once bound him so tightly to Meghan. But cutting ties wasn't simple. Because this wasn't just about a marriage. It was about the monarchy, the crown, and the future of the children caught in the middle. And as Harry's rage boiled over and Meghan's silence held firm, the question of Archie's real father loomed larger than ever. The palace wanted answers. The public demanded them. And Harry himself, broken and betrayed, began searching for the truth Meghan refused to speak. And what he found would be more devastating than even the DNA results. Because if Harry wasn't the father, then who was? The search for that answer would take this scandal from heartbreak to full-blown royal catastrophe. And no one, not Harry, not Meghan, not the crown, would escape unscathed. What happens when the truth you fear most isn't just about you, but about who else may be standing in the shadows? If Prince Harry wasn't Archie's father, then someone else was. That haunting realization didn't just break Harry's heart, it lit a fire under him. Because unanswered questions don't just sit quietly. They grow, they gnaw, and eventually, they consume you. For Harry, the question of Archie's real father became an obsession. Let's picture the moment. Harry pacing late at night, glass in hand, staring at photographs of Meghan's past. Old friends, former colleagues, rumors from her Hollywood days. Every man she had ever smiled with, worked with, or been linked to suddenly became a suspect. Can you feel the paranoia, the humiliation, the aching need to know? Because once the possibility of betrayal is planted, it rewrites history. Every laugh Meghan shared with another man, every late-night phone call, every unexplained trip. Suddenly, it all looks different. And here's the cruel irony. Harry had once prided himself on not caring about Meghan's past. He'd defended her against criticism, laughed off the tabloids, even told friends, "She's my future, not her past." But now, with the DNA results echoing in his head, the past came roaring back like a ghost he couldn't exorcise. Did Meghan's past hold the key to Archie's true paternity? Or was Harry driving himself mad, chasing shadows that weren't even there? The search for the real father didn't stay in Harry's head for long. Word leaked, as it always does. And once the palace caught wind of the whispers, investigations quietly began. Royal aides are nothing if not thorough. They dug through timelines, looked at travel records, examined overlaps between Meghan's life before Harry and the months leading up to Archie's birth. And what they found only fueled more suspicion. Let's ask the uncomfortable question. Why were Meghan's movements during certain months so carefully shielded from the press? Why were photographs limited, schedules unclear, statements vague? To the outside world, it looked like normal royal privacy. But to insiders, it looked like deliberate obfuscation. Was Meghan hiding someone? Or was the palace itself complicit in keeping timelines blurry, afraid of what closer inspection might reveal? Now, here's where it gets darker. Names began to surface. A former colleague from Meghan's acting days. A rumored fling during her early Hollywood years. Even whispers of someone connected to the very circles Harry had welcomed her into. Each name was dissected, each theory explored, until the speculation became unbearable. Imagine being Harry, hearing names of men you'd never met, or worse, men you had. Imagine wondering if one of them, not you, was the true father of your son. Could you live with that uncertainty? Or would it drive you to the edge of madness? And it wasn't just Harry asking. The tabloids were relentless. Every grainy photo of Meghan with another man resurfaced. Every past relationship was turned into potential evidence. Headlines screamed with questions they couldn't answer, but every article chipped away at Harry's dignity. The world wasn't just questioning his marriage anymore. It was questioning his fatherhood, his manhood, his very identity. How much humiliation can one man take before he breaks? Here's the contradiction. Harry, the man who hated the media with every fiber of his being, now found himself reading their headlines in secret, scouring their articles, looking for clues, desperate to see if they knew something he didn't. The very enemy he had sworn to fight became his unwilling ally in the search for truth. Isn't that the cruelest twist? Meanwhile, Meghan's silence remained unbroken. She refused to name names, refused to deny, refused to confirm. Her calm composure only deepened Harry's torment. Was she protecting someone? Was she protecting herself? Or was she allowing Harry to spiral, knowing that the lack of answers would torture him more than any confession? Friends say Harry began reaching out privately, calls to old acquaintances of Meghan, messages to people she hadn't spoken to in years. Did you know her then? Were you close? Desperation doesn't look like a prince. It looks like a broken man, begging strangers for pieces of a puzzle he can't solve. But the more he searched, the fewer answers he found. And the fewer answers he found, the more unbearable the silence became. Let's pause and ask you directly. If you were Harry, would you keep searching? Would you rip apart every corner of the past until you found the truth? Or would you stop, terrified that the truth you uncover might be worse than the lie you're living? Harry chose to search, and that search turned suspicion into obsession. But here's the kicker. Harry wasn't the only one searching. The palace was too. And when the palace searches, they don't stop at speculation. They dig. They verify. They connect dots the public can't see. And what they began to uncover pointed to a possibility so shocking, so scandalous, that it threatened not just Harry's marriage, but the stability of the crown itself. Because if Archie's real father wasn't Harry, then who held that place in the shadows? Was it a forgotten face from Meghan's Hollywood past? A powerful figure with ties to her new world? Or someone closer, far closer, than anyone dared imagine? And as whispers grew louder, one name began to surface more persistently than the rest. A name that, if true, would ignite the greatest scandal in modern royal history. But what that name was, and what it meant for the monarchy, would push Harry to make a choice no royal had ever made before. What if the name whispered behind closed doors was one Harry knew all too well? What if the shadow looming over his family wasn't a stranger from Meghan's Hollywood past, but someone who had brushed shoulders with him? Someone who could never have been imagined as part of this devastating puzzle. That's the torment Harry now faced. The possibility that betrayal wasn't far away in another world, but dangerously close to his own. Think about it. A rumor about a stranger hurts, but it's dismissible. A rumor about someone familiar? That's poison, because it takes root in your mind. It infects your memories. It makes every interaction feel like a cruel joke. And that's what was happening to Harry. Sources claim the whispers that started with vague names were now circling around someone close enough to sting. Someone who, if revealed, could rip apart not just his marriage but the delicate fabric of the monarchy itself. Now here's the contradiction. On the one hand, Harry wanted answers. He wanted the truth, no matter how devastating. On the other, he dreaded it. Because once a name is spoken aloud, once it's confirmed, you can't go back. It's no longer suspicion, it's reality. So he danced between fury and silence, between demanding names and avoiding them, torn between needing clarity and fearing it. Haven't you ever wanted to know something desperately, while at the same time praying you never hear the answer? That's the razor's edge Harry was walking. Meanwhile, the palace machine was in full motion. Advisors worked quietly, combing through Meghan's timelines, matching dates, cross-referencing events. Their job wasn't just to find answers. It was to protect the crown. Because let's be honest, this scandal wasn't just Harry's personal heartbreak. It was an institutional crisis. If Archie's paternity came into question, it wouldn't just be Harry's legacy at stake. It would raise questions about succession, about titles, about the credibility of the monarchy itself. Imagine the panic inside Buckingham Palace. Every possibility carried risk. Every name whispered in the corridors threatened to ignite a fire they couldn't contain. But the cruelest part? Harry wasn't privy to all of it. While he spiraled in private, drinking more, pacing the Montecito estate, the palace was working in silence. He wasn't just being betrayed by Meghan. He was being sidelined by his own family. His pain became their problem to manage, and their management meant keeping him in the dark. Can you imagine that isolation? Your wife won't speak, your family won't confide, and your child's paternity hangs in the balance like a sword over your head. And yet, through it all, Archie remained at the center. A little boy, innocent, oblivious, caught in a storm he never created. This is where the tragedy cuts the deepest. Harry loved Archie. That was undeniable. Every bedtime story, every hug, every laugh, they were real. And yet, every time Harry looked into his son's eyes, he was haunted by the words of that DNA test. Not the father. Love clashed with betrayal. Fatherhood clashed with humiliation. And the cruel irony? Both could be true at the same time. He wasn't Archie's biological father, but he was the man who had raised him. What do you do when science and love rip you in two directions? The outside world was watching too. The tabloids grew vicious. The whispers leaked into headlines. Speculation turned into global gossip. Meghan's past relationships were dragged into the spotlight again, dissected mercilessly. And Harry, once so quick to defend her, fell silent. Was it because he no longer believed her innocence? Or because he feared that by speaking, he'd confirm the rumors? Silence, once again, became the loudest answer. Now here's the twist. Among the names whispered, one kept resurfacing. A name insiders refused to repeat publicly, but admitted in private was close to home. Theories swirled. Was it a wealthy Hollywood connection? Was it someone from Meghan's time in Toronto during Suits? Or, more dangerously, was it someone linked to royal circles themselves? Imagine the scandal if the father of Archie wasn't just a forgotten figure from Meghan's past, but someone connected to the crown. That possibility alone was enough to terrify the palace into silence. And Harry? He couldn't shake it. He began replaying conversations, interactions, analyzing Meghan's every move in hindsight. Did her smile linger too long with that person? Did her tone shift when that name came up? That's how suspicion works. It rewrites your past. Every detail becomes a clue. Every memory becomes evidence. And Harry, already broken, couldn't stop himself from unraveling. So let me ask you, what would you do if you were Harry? Would you keep digging, risking more pain with every answer? Or would you stop, trying to salvage what little piece you had left? Harry chose to dig. He wanted names. He wanted certainty. And the deeper he dug, the darker the possibilities became. The search for Archie's real father wasn't just a private torment anymore. It was becoming a global hunt, a question asked in whispers across continents, in headlines splashed across tabloids, in strategy meetings inside Buckingham Palace. And every theory, every rumor, every name only pushed Harry further toward a devastating choice. Because the truth wasn't just about who Archie's father was. It was about what Harry would do once he found out. Would he forgive? Would he fight? Or would he, as insiders suggest, sever every tie, not just to Meghan, but to Archie himself, the child he loved yet no longer believed was his own? That's the question that would define the next chapter. And what Harry chose to do next would shock not just his family, not just Meghan, but the entire world. What kind of man walks away from everything he thought he knew? What kind of prince, bound by centuries of tradition and bloodline, decides that the only option left is to cut every tie? Family, marriage, even the bond to the child he once cradled in his arms. That was the impossible crossroads Prince Harry now stood at. And make no mistake, this wasn't just an impulsive choice born from rage. This was the culmination of betrayal, silence, suspicion, and humiliation pressing down on him until he felt there was no other way out. For weeks, Harry had lived in torment. The DNA results gnawed at his soul. Meghan's silence sliced deeper than any words could. The whispers about another man, perhaps someone close, perhaps someone powerful, played on repeat in his head. And through it all, Archie's innocent face stared back at him, both a source of love and a painful reminder of what he had lost. Can you imagine that contradiction? To love a child more than life itself, and yet to see him as proof of your deepest humiliation? Cutting ties wasn't a decision Harry made in one explosive moment. It came slowly, piece by piece, like bricks being pulled from a wall until the whole thing crumbled. First, it was the distance. Friends noticed Harry withdrawing, not just from Meghan, but from Archie too. The bedtime stories stopped. The long walks together in the garden grew shorter. Insiders say he sometimes avoided Archie's room altogether, unable to face the child he now believed wasn't his. Isn't that heartbreaking? A man torn between love and betrayal, forced to pull away not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much to endure the pain. Then came the arguments. Harry and Meghan's relationship turned into a battlefield. Every conversation became a fight. Every glance carried accusation. Meghan wanted to move on, to focus on the present, to bury the whispers under layers of PR and polished appearances. Harry couldn't. He couldn't unsee the DNA test. He couldn't forget the silence. He couldn't stop wondering whose child Archie truly was. And so the distance widened. Meghan clung to control. Harry spiraled into anger. And the marriage that once seemed untouchable began to fracture in front of the world's eyes. But here's the devastating irony. Cutting ties didn't just mean leaving Meghan. It meant severing himself from the very family he had sacrificed everything for. Because Harry knew that once the truth came out, and it would come out, his place in the monarchy would become untenable. A prince whose child wasn't his own. A scandal of that magnitude could unravel centuries of tradition. The crown couldn't protect him. William couldn't shield him. Charles wouldn't risk the monarchy's survival for the sake of one broken son. Harry had seen how the palace operated. Protect the crown at all costs, even if it means sacrificing family. And this time, Harry was the sacrifice. So he made the choice for them. He decided to cut ties before they could cut him. To walk away, not just from Meghan, but from the entire institution that had defined his life. Sources close to Harry described him as cold, resolved, no longer the fiery young prince, but a man hardened by betrayal. He began closing doors one by one. Meetings canceled, calls ignored, invitations declined. And then came the final, brutal step, distancing himself from Archie. This is the moment that shocks people the most. How could Harry, the man who once said he'd die for his family, walk away from his own son? But let's ask the painful question. If you believed that the child you loved was the result of betrayal, if every hug reminded you of a lie, would you have the strength to stay? Or would you, like Harry, see walking away as the only way to survive? It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it easy. But it makes it human. And Harry's decision wasn't made in a vacuum. The palace pushed too. Behind closed doors, advisors urged him to distance himself, to avoid dragging the crown into a scandal it couldn't survive. If Harry cut ties, they argued, the monarchy could contain the damage. If he stayed, the entire institution risked collapse. So once again, Harry found himself forced to choose between his own heart and the survival of the family he had spent his life serving. And this time, he chose survival. Not for them, for himself. Imagine the conversation when he told Meghan. Insiders say it was explosive. Harry, cold and determined. Meghan, furious and desperate. She begged, she argued, she accused. But Harry stood firm. I can't do this anymore, he reportedly said. I can't live a lie. And with those words, the fairy tale shattered. The marriage that had once captivated the world was now a battlefield of betrayal, silence, and broken trust. And the fallout didn't stop there. News of Harry's decision began to seep out. Friends confided in friends. Reporters picked up whispers. Headlines began to speculate. Has Harry walked out? Is the marriage over? And for the first time, Harry didn't fight back. He didn't sue. He didn't release angry statements. He let the rumors swirl, perhaps because, for once, they weren't lies. They were the truth he was no longer willing to hide. But cutting ties had consequences Harry hadn't anticipated. Meghan, furious at his decision, began preparing her own counter-moves. Legal threats, PR strategies, plans to reclaim the narrative before Harry could destroy it. Because if there's one thing Meghan has always understood, it's the power of perception. And in this war of silence and betrayal, perception would be everything. So where does that leave Harry? Alone, broken, a prince without a kingdom, a father without a son, a husband without a wife. And yet, in his own mind, perhaps finally free. Free from the lies. Free from the whispers. Free from the silence that had suffocated him for so long. But freedom comes at a cost. And Harry's cost was the life he had built, the family he had loved, and the future he had once imagined. The question now is simple and terrifying. By cutting ties, did Harry save himself? Or did he set in motion a chain of events that would destroy him completely? Because Meghan wasn't about to go quietly. The palace wasn't about to let the scandal rest. And the world? The world was hungry for answers, desperate for names, ready to feast on the ruins of Harry's broken life. And what came next would take this scandal from private betrayal to full-blown war. A war that no one, not Harry, not Meghan, not even the crown itself, could escape. What happens when a family crisis turns into a royal emergency? When a private betrayal transforms into a public scandal too big for the crown to contain? That's exactly what unfolded once whispers of Harry's decision to cut ties reached Buckingham Palace. The monarchy had survived affairs, divorces, even abdications, but never before had it faced something so intimate, so damning, so explosive. A DNA scandal wasn't just gossip. It was a threat to the very lifeblood of the institution, lineage. Inside the palace walls, panic rippled like a silent earthquake. Charles, William, Camilla, even and each of them, sources say, reacted differently, but all shared the same fear. If the truth escaped, it could destroy the crown's credibility. Because a monarchy without trust in its bloodline is like a house without a foundation. Once it cracks, it collapses. Let's start with Charles. For him, this was more than scandal. It was déjà vu. His reign had barely settled, still haunted by ghosts of Diana, still shadowed by Andrew's disgrace, still precarious in the eyes of a skeptical public. Now his youngest son threatened to unleash the greatest crisis of all. Reports suggest Charles's first instinct was to control. He called emergency meetings. He demanded reports from aides. He asked again and again, who knows? His priority wasn't Harry's heartbreak. It was containment. Isn't that the cold truth of monarchy? Family comes second. The crown comes first. William's reaction was sharper, more personal. The bond between the brothers had already been fractured. This revelation widened the chasm into a canyon. Insiders say William was furious, not just at Meghan, not just at the scandal, but at Harry himself. Why would he even take a test? He reportedly snapped. Doesn't he understand what this does to all of us? Think about that. William's anger wasn't rooted in sympathy. It was rooted in the burden of being heir. Every scandal touches him too. Every whisper weakens the throne he is destined to inherit. And to William, Harry had thrown gasoline on a fire the family could barely keep under control. Camilla's response? Calculated, as always. She knew scandal. She had lived scandal. But this was different. She warned Charles that the public would not forgive another cover-up. If you hide this, they'll burn you for it, she allegedly said. And she wasn't wrong. The monarchy had already been accused of hiding too much: Diana's pain, Andrew's crimes, Meghan's grievances. Another secret, especially one of this magnitude, could ignite fury that no PR campaign could extinguish. And then there was Anne, the stoic, no-nonsense princess. She was said to be blunt, even ruthless. If he's not the father, cut them loose, she reportedly told Charles. To Anne, sentimentality had no place in monarchy. The crown's survival mattered more than Harry's feelings. And in her cold logic, perhaps she saw the truth the others refused to admit. Harry was already halfway out the door. Why not let him go completely? But here's the contradiction. While the palace strategized, Harry's pain wasn't strategy. It was raw. It was human. He wasn't thinking about optics or headlines or lineage. He was thinking about betrayal, about silence, about a child he loved but no longer believed was his. And while the family spoke in boardroom tones about containment, Harry was crumbling. Isn't that the tragedy? That even in his darkest hour, his family treated him not as a son or a brother, but as a liability. Behind the scenes, aides crafted plans, tight-lipped statements, controlled leaks, quiet instructions to allies and the press. The goal was simple: keep the scandal buried at any cost. But burying a secret this explosive is like trying to hold back a flood with your hands. It always finds a way to break through. And this time, the flood was global. Social media buzzed with theories. Tabloids ran stories with coy headlines. Archie's mystery. The Windsor question. The palace couldn't silence the world. They could only hope to outlast it. Meanwhile, Meghan prepared her counterattack. While Harry cut ties, Meghan doubled down. Interviews lined up. Legal teams activated. Friends briefed. She wasn't about to let Harry's narrative dominate. Control the story or the story controls you. That's always been Meghan's philosophy. And now, More than ever, she was determined to fight. The palace braced for impact, knowing that Meghan's version of events would be just as dangerous as Harry's silence. But the real storm came from outside. International media smelled blood. American outlets framed it as a tragic love story. British tabloids sharpened their knives, eager to expose Meghan. European press speculated about the monarchy's survival. And the public? They were divided. Some pitied Harry, a man broken by betrayal. Others mocked him, calling him naive, even weak. The narrative was spiraling, slipping through the palace's fingers. And here's the twist. In their desperation to contain the scandal, the palace made a fatal mistake. They underestimated Harry. They assumed he would stay silent, too broken to speak. But insiders claim Harry, fueled by anger and humiliation, was preparing to do the unthinkable, to go public himself, to tell the world exactly what the DNA results revealed. Imagine the impact. A prince confirming he was not the father of his own son. A monarchy exposed to its core. Could the crown survive such a blow? Or would it collapse under the weight of truth? That was the looming question hang.